Welcome back, sleepyheads. Tonight, the spotlight isn't on someone falling in love. It's on the person organizing it behind the scenes, armed with a quill, a headache, and zero first-hand experience. You're the village matchmaker. Never been on a date, never held hands without filling out a form first. And yet everyone turns to you when they're ready to declare feelings, exchange livestock, or get into legally binding soup arguments. Your office smells like wax and regret. The scrolls are sorted by personality type, feud history, and emotional risk. Red string means unstable. Yellow means previously matched with a cousin. Green means maybe if they stop yelling. Somehow, this village believes in the process. In you. Not because it works, because it's organized. So get comfortable. The chair might squeak, the romance might combust, but the scrolls are waiting. And apparently, so is everyone else. Your office is where romance goes to be aggressively organized. It's tucked behind the apothecary, next to the baker's woodpile, and held together by hope, wax drippings, and whatever mold grows on unventilated stone. There's no sign outside, just a chair that might be a chair, and a suspiciously floral smell from next door's soap experiments. Still, people find it. Love, it seems, follows the smell of mildew and desperation. The room itself is narrow, slanted, and probably not up to code. There's one window which does not open, and one desk which does, usually when you don't want it to. The ink on the walls isn't decorative. It's from the time the ceiling cried. You haven't fixed it because honestly it adds character, like a haunted ledger. Your tools are simple: a jar of goose feathers, half a dozen ink pots, most labelled "Do Not Drink," a scroll cabinet sorted by name, mood, and whether the applicant has ever yelled at a chicken in public. Every villager has a file. Every file is tied with a color-coded string. Red means volatile, blue means quiet, yellow means they've been matched so many times the parchment is soft. You track the basics: age, temperament, available livestock. And the essentials: how dramatic their parents are, whether their laugh is pleasant or vaguely aquatic, and how they respond when told marriage includes chores. One man claimed to be emotionally stable, but fainted when asked if he could share a bed. Another said he wanted someone just like his mother, and you had to take a long walk after that. A woman once handed you a resume that included excellent mushroom foraging skills and a sketch of her ex-boyfriend with X's over his eyes. Clients sit in a chair across from you. It squeaks like it's trying to confess something. They fidget, ramble, make wild declarations like, "I'm ready to love," or "I think I'd like someone taller than me, but emotionally shorter." You smile, nod, and write things down in shorthand only you understand. One page just says, "Goat trauma, unresolved." The bookshelf contains a single volume, Principles of Harmonious Union, by a celibate monk with strong opinions and very little evidence. It's mostly spleen diagrams and warnings about the dangers of laughter. You keep it for the aura of authority, and because it props up the teapot. Your process is efficient. You interview, you listen, you scribble notes that would make no sense to anyone else. Likes dogs, hates eye contact, acceptable ankles. And then, using a mix of intuition and aggressively informal math, you assign them a match. Sometimes it works, sometimes it explodes. One couple eloped, one pair opened a cheese cart, one match led to a sword fight over bread. You wrote them all down. And even though your room smells like burnt time and old decisions, people come back. They trust you. Not because you're magical, because you're meticulous. And maybe because you never lie, except about the exact number of times someone has been rejected. You always round down. You've never had your own name in the scroll cabinet. But lately, you keep wondering what color string it would have. Probably orange. For emotionally constipated, but trying. Welcome to your office, where love begins with a quill and ends with plausible deniability. The application form was supposed to be simple. 6 questions, 1 piece of parchment. No drawings, no metaphors, just facts. Instead, it's a hall of mirrors where truth comes to nap and fantasy runs wild in its underwear. People lie, constantly, with creativity. Some lies are big, like claiming to be descended from royalty, or saying they own a vineyard when they're allergic to grapes. Some are small, like trimming 5 years off their age, or describing their hair color as sunlight copper when it's more barn hay accident. One man listed his job as livestock whisperer. Turns out he just stands near pigs and hopes they feel inspired. Another claimed to be a traveling philosopher. You later found out he's been banned from the next village over for aggressive interpretive dancing in their cheese market. You read applications that say things like, well read, when what they mean is, once stared at the back of a grain sack with writing on it. Others describe themselves as emotionally generous, which usually means they cry when bread is too warm. Every fifth applicant writes some version of just looking for someone kind, which sounds sweet until you find out they define kindness as lets me win arguments and doesn't ask about the basement. Even the shy ones lie. A quiet boy once wrote, "Simple man, simple needs." His mother then stormed in an hour later with a list of 42 non-negotiable traits he expects in a bride, including strong ankles and voice like distant bells. You keep a growing dictionary of code words. Independent means refuses to share food. Hardworking means bad at sitting still. Has hobbies usually means something illegal with smoke. And if someone says, "I don't believe in labels," it means they've scared off at least 2 sheep and 1 priest. Sometimes you get artwork. One man drew a picture of himself holding a sword with lightning in the background. He forgot to mention he lives in a tent and is scared of ducks. But occasionally, the truth slips through. Raw, weird, wonderful. One woman wrote, "I chew loud, I overwater plants, and I once fell in love with a man who thought potatoes were fruit." You matched her with a barrel maker who talks to trees. They're expecting twins. You don't fault anyone for the lies. They're trying. They want to be seen. They want someone to hold their hand and say, "Yes, you and your dramatic mushroom hobby are lovable." And maybe you don't know what love feels like. But you do know what loneliness looks like when it tries to sound confident. It's all over these forms. So you match them anyway, carefully, hopefully, with a quill in one hand and a skeptical eyebrow in the other. Because even the worst application you've ever read, the one that just said, "I eat meat, deal with it," deserves a shot. Well, maybe not him. He also stapled a sausage to the form. But the rest? You'll find someone, probably, eventually, or at least distract them with another goat owner and hope sparks fly before dinner. Your village is cozy, which is a polite way of saying it's so small that privacy is considered a form of witchcraft. There are 42 residents, 38 opinions, and approximately 7 last names. And 5 of them are just different spellings of the same one. Most people are related in some way, even if it's just spiritually through shared trauma and poor decision-making. Nothing stays secret here. If you blink too long at someone's sister, 3 people write it in their diaries, and the baker adds heart-shaped loaves to his window in anticipation. Gossip moves faster than infection, and with more drama. You once sneezed during a village meeting and someone asked if it was a sign you were in love. People don't just hold grudges, they curate them, catalogue them, pass them down like heirlooms. You have a couple who won't speak because of an argument over which family invented stewed cabbage. The feud is now on its 4th generation and has its own seating chart at public events. You keep a feud chart. It's a full tapestry at this point. Red for active grudges, blue for Cold War, yellow for passive-aggressive livestock exchanges. You once used an entire roll of thread on one dispute that started because someone stepped on someone else's shadow during a solstice dance. And then there's the annual disasters. The Great Soup Incident, for example. You tried matching Milda with Borin. Perfect on paper, both own goats, neither yells. But Milda hasn't forgiven Borin's aunt for calling her stew emotionally forgettable in front of the priest. The aftermath included 3 ruined proposals, a dramatic soup boycott, and a spontaneous chili cook-off that no one survived emotionally. There was the Lintel Festival love triangle of last year. 2 men proposed to the same woman at the exact same moment. One brought flowers, one brought a pig. The pig won. The woman left with the baker. The jilted suitors now only speak through their goats, who have also taken sides. Romance here is a full contact sport. You have to dodge exes, feud fallout, inherited family opinions, and that one neighbor who insists on weighing in despite being single since the dawn of wheat. Your job isn't just matchmaking, it's matchmaking while dancing on a very thin layer of frozen conflict. You plan every potential match like a military operation. You whisper sweet nothings into scrolls and pray the recipient doesn't respond with fire. You ask the necessary questions. Has she forgiven his cousin? Does his pig still remember that corn theft? Did the pie contest really end, or are we still pretending? When emotions boil, you try to keep the lid on, but sometimes it spills over. And by spills, you mean someone gets hit with a cabbage and the bell tower gets involved. That only happened once, twice, okay, 4 times, but that last one wasn't your fault. The goat started it. In this village, love has baggage. It has history. It has receipts. But you still believe, sort of. You still try. Because even if your matches spark arguments, at least it means people are feeling something. And feelings are where love begins, right after the shouting stops. You've built a matchmaking system so complex it scares the priest and confuses the goats. It started simply enough. A few scrolls, some names, a lot of hope. Then one winter, while snowed in with nothing but beet soup and mild panic, you decided to organize love like it was tax season. Now you have charts, dozens of them, compatibility tables, emotional weather maps, a suspiciously detailed graph titled Likelihood of Public Argument versus Pie Preference. Each villager is assigned a profile. You grade them on important categories: emotional range, A through F, eye contactability, measured in seconds, soup sharing habits, and whether or not they pronounce the word ointment in a way that makes people nervous. You even invented your own scale. The goose scale. 1 goose means calm and ready. 5 geese means emotionally flammable and likely to cry during bread slicing. There's also a color system: green for stable, orange for intense, and purple for do not match unless you want an alibi. Some matches are straightforward. You pair 2 quiet people who love mushrooms and dislike sudden movement. They marry, raise goats, and talk twice a year. Beautiful. Other matches are less successful. One couple got along so well they opened a soup stand. Then she found out he doesn't believe in spoons. You're still cleaning up that mess. Emotionally and literally. That was a lot of soup. You have rules, of course. No matching anyone who's cursed. No one with a history of proposal-related injuries. Definitely no one who says, "I'm just being honest," while holding a blunt object. You keep a wall of near misses. It's got scrolls, faded sketches, and a slightly singed love poem written entirely in goat references. There was the guy who fell in love with someone else's reflection, the girl who matched with her cousin, twice, the woman who insisted her future partner must be able to juggle live poultry. You matched her with the juggler. He got pecked. They're married now. Your system isn't perfect. Sometimes it matches based on dream interpretation and fermented logic. Once, it paired a man with a fence because his form said, "needs boundaries." But you keep refining. You add a new question. Have you ever cursed at moonlight? Another. What would you name a hypothetical goat you hate but depend on? These tell you more than anyone realizes. People trust your process. They show up with ink on their hands and hope in their eyes. You take their answers, weigh them against half-remembered gossip and a gut feeling you call romantic math. And then you spin the wheel. A literal one. It's wooden, unbalanced, and makes a noise like a sigh every time it lands. It adds drama and plausible deniability. Because the truth is, no system can guarantee love, but yours can guarantee chaos with a strong chance of affection, and in this village, that's more than enough. It all started with old Ruther and Jan the breadman, 2 villagers with no business falling in love. Ruther was famous for shouting at clouds and throwing cabbages at people who sneezed too loudly. Jan once tried to impress a woman by baking her a loaf shaped like a duck. It came out looking like a sad boot, and she left town. You didn't exactly match them on purpose. It was more of an experiment, a social test. Okay, maybe you were just bored. They both liked soup and silence, and neither had caused a scandal in at least 2 months. That was enough. You handed them scrolls with each other's names. Jan squinted at his and asked if it was a prank. Ruther grunted, then went back to stirring something in a pot that may or may not have contained bones. You called it a promising start. To your shock, it worked. A week later, they were walking together. Not holding hands, but close enough that people stopped and stared like they'd spotted a unicorn wearing shoes. Ruther didn't yell at anyone for 3 days. Jan gave her half a roll. It was practically a proposal. By the end of the month, they were married. No big party. Just a quick ceremony next to the goat pen, a few confused relatives, and a rooster that refused to stop crowing during the vows. The priest tried to bless the union, but Ruther cut him off and said, "Let's not drag heaven into this." Someone brought a pie. It disappeared. Days later, it was found under Jan's hat, perfectly preserved. No one had questions. Everyone had concerns. Afterward, Ruther smiled at you. Actually smiled. Jan gave you a loaf of bread shaped like a heart. You accepted it with both hands and mild fear. You wrote it down, match number 1. No injuries, no screaming. 1 missing pie. You pinned the note to your scroll cabinet and gave it a gold star. The only gold star you've ever used. Word spread fast. Suddenly you weren't just the person who organized scrolls and avoided eye contact. You were the matchmaker with a capital M and more responsibility than anyone asked for. People started showing up with hopeful eyes and handmade snacks. One man brought a jar of jam labeled "for future spouse" or "whoever will take me." The local blacksmith dropped off flowers and flexed unnecessarily. The town's single goat herder asked if emotional support goats counted as part of a dowry. You never planned to become important. You were just trying to prevent Ruther from assaulting the candlemaker again. But now people believed you had answers, or at least theories, or maybe just enough free time to take responsibility for their feelings. And somewhere in the back of your very organized mind, you felt a strange sensation. A tiny flicker of something almost like pride. Not because they fell in love, but because, against all odds, they didn't immediately fall apart, which, in this village, is basically the same thing. After the Ruther Jan miracle, people assumed you had powers, romantic powers, the kind that could bring 2 people together with just a glance, a scroll, and maybe a bread offering. So naturally, someone suggested you host a mixer, and, for reasons still unclear, you agreed. You named it a gathering of compatible spirits. It sounded magical, classy, organized. In reality, it was just an awkward potluck with name tags and emotional tension thick enough to spread on toast. You decorated the town square with lanterns made from old jars, strung up twine to mark a conversation zone, and laid out your scrolls like they were treasure maps. You even baked cookies, 1 batch. They came out shaped like anxiety, and people trickled in dressed like they were attending a wedding, a funeral, and a hay bale burning all at once. Some brought gifts. 1 woman brought a carved spoon. 1 man brought a goat. The goat was not on the guest list. You handed out name tags. They were waxed, color-coded, and slightly sticky because you ran out of sealing resin and used honey instead. It was fine, until the bees showed up. At first, everything looked promising. Small groups gathered. Someone complimented someone else's elbows. There was laughter, cautious smiles, and 1 brief arm touch that may have been either affection or a failed attempt at balance. Then came the stew. No one knows who made it. No one claimed it. But it was placed at the center of the table like a dark omen. It smelled like nostalgia and bad decisions. Within 10 minutes, someone was crying. Within 15, someone was yelling about betrayal and carrots. At 20 minutes, a man shouted, "This tastes like my first heartbreak." and tried to throw the pot into the river. That's when the goats escaped. One chased the fiddle player, the other climbed a barrel and declared itself king. Meanwhile, 3 villagers began arguing about who invented kissing. It got loud and weirdly historical. You attempted to give a heartfelt speech, something about how love is messy, unpredictable, and not always stew-compatible, but you were interrupted by a heated debate over whether snoring counts as a personality flaw. Things unraveled quickly. Someone proposed to a chair. Someone else accepted on its behalf. 2 people stormed off together and then immediately returned because they forgot their soup bowls. You ended the night by throwing a tablecloth over the mess, standing on a crate and declaring, "Romance is cancelled. Everyone go home and hug your own feelings." People left. Some confused, some weeping. One man whispered, "Best night of my life," and walked into the fog. You hope he's okay. You sat there afterward, picking beeswax off the name tags and wondering if love was allergic to public events. You ate one of your anxiety cookies. It tasted like failure and cinnamon. Never again, you promised yourself. And yet, part of you wonders what might have happened if the stew hadn't been so emotional. But no, number you refused to host another one. Probably. After the disaster that was your village mixer, you decided the problem wasn't you. Obviously, it was the lack of cosmic alignment. The stars, you reasoned, were probably just in a bad mood, so you turned to astrology. Because if you couldn't find logic in goat ownership and bread preferences, maybe the sky had answers, or at least better excuses. You began by studying constellations on the ceiling of the town library outhouse. They weren't real, but someone painted them in glow mud and wrote mysterious labels like Big Cow and The Sneeze. It was enough. You made your own star chart using a dinner plate, a compass, and some spilled ink that vaguely resembled destiny. Then you created your very own zodiac. 12 romantic signs, each named after something important to your village. Things like parsnip, goat fire, the smiling pig, wet boot, and of course, the long spoon. Each sign came with traits you mostly made up based on weather patterns and personal grudges. People born during heavy rain were considered emotionally slippery. Those born during clear skies were too confident and likely to walk into ponds. You started publishing horoscopes, weekly, loudly, pinned right outside your door with wax and passive aggression. Your forecasts included lines like, "Today is a good day to avoid anyone with strong opinions about cheese," and "Romance is impossible if Mercury enters retro milk." People loved it. Too much. Milda ended her engagement because her chart said betrayal was brewing. A couple postponed their wedding until Mars stopped being judgmental. One man refused to speak to his match for 3 days after learning she was born under the sign of the cranky goat. You had to start keeping track of people's birth dates, which was harder than it sounds because no one remembers when they were born. One guy guessed somewhere between the last flood and the chicken riot. You labeled him Unclear Sky. Astrology quickly became the new religion. One woman said the stars told her to focus on self-love. She did, loudly, at the tavern, every night, for a week, with singing. Of course, problems popped up. People started faking their signs to match with more desirable partners. One man demanded a full refund after learning his rising sign was emotionally sticky. And then there was the garlic ritual. A small group tried to summon better love energy using herbs, a turnip doll, and some dance moves no one asked for. The mayor asked you to explain. You told him the stars made you do it. Still, it worked, sort of. People felt guided. They had reasons now, reasons to hope, to blame, to dream, and reasons to explain why their last date ended in tears and spilled stew. You still keep your star chart behind your desk, not because it works, but because it makes you look like you understand something big. You don't. But when people look at you like you're wise, you nod slowly, point at the stars, and say something vague like, Ah yes, romantic turbulence in the house of spoiled turnips. They leave satisfied, and that's all that really matters. Ulrich the blacksmith is not a subtle man. He's loud, square-shaped, and walks like every flaw has personally offended him. One morning, he stomps into your office, holding a scroll like it's a battle axe, and says, "Find me a wife." You ask him what he's looking for in a partner. He says, "Strong hands, good teeth, doesn't faint at the sound of metal, must love soup." You pause for a moment, make a note, and quietly remove 3 names from your list. One of them fainted during an arm wrestling contest with her own shadow. Ulrich says he's ready for commitment. You say that's wonderful. He says he's also ready to never talk about his feelings. You say that's less wonderful. He insists emotional expression is for people who don't lift anvils. You draw a small frown next to his name. The first match doesn't go well. She laughed too loud. The second had a cat, which he described as witch energy. The third was too polite. He said it made him feel like he was being watched by an angel and judged by a grandmother at the same time. You finally match him with Greta. Greta is practical, strong, and once got into a shouting match with a badger and won. You figure if anyone can match Ulrich blow for blow, emotionally or otherwise, it's her. They meet, they talk, they bond over animal injuries and a shared hatred of lukewarm stew. Things go surprisingly well until Greta calls his forge cute. Ulrich takes this personally. He storms into your office and demands a refund. You tell him the match was free. He demands emotional compensation. You offer him a boiled turnip. He throws it at your wall. A week passes. You assume he's back to talking to his hammer. Then he returns. Less stomping this time. He sits down, stares at your teacup, and asks if Greta's still single. You say yes. He says nothing. You say nothing. You both sit in silence, bonded by awkward hope and mild shame. Finally, he nods. You write down the date of their next meeting and don't mention the turnip stain. They give it another try. This time, it sticks. They trade recipes for stew. She brings him stronger gloves. He calls her apron battle gear. You spot them at the well one evening, laughing like 2 people who know how heavy things get, but don't mind carrying them together. You don't say anything, but you do add their names to your possibly happy list and underline it twice. Ulrich never thanks you, but a week later, your office window has a new iron latch that doesn't squeak. There's no note, just craftsmanship. You take it as a thank you, or maybe a peace offering, or maybe just Ulrich's way of saying, "I don't know what love is, but this is close enough." And honestly, close enough is sometimes exactly right. At some point, you became more than just the matchmaker. You became the village ghostwriter of affection. People started coming to you not just for names, but for words. Sweet words. Gentle words. Words that don't sound like they were scribbled by someone who still calls a hug suspicious proximity. It started small. One man asked you to help him write a note to a woman who sold cabbages. You suggested something romantic. He suggested mentioning her turnip storage technique. You compromised with, "Your root cellar is both efficient and emotionally resonant." It went well. Words spread. Suddenly you were writing for everyone. Notes, poems, declarations of interest. You even ghost wrote a lullaby for a pig farmer who said he just wanted a woman who respected boundaries and bacon. Of course, not all requests were reasonable. One man asked you to write a love letter using only metaphors about bees. Another asked you to make him sound like someone who could carry firewood, but also feelings. You tried your best. You really did. But then the mistakes began. You accidentally used the same metaphor, "Your eyes are like rain in summer," in 2 letters. The women were sisters. It didn't go unnoticed. There was a mild shouting match. Someone threw jam. You pretended to be out of town. One woman recognized your handwriting. She stormed in, waved the scroll, and demanded to know why her letter was signed "Yours" in affectionate confusion. You didn't have a good answer, mostly because that's your default signature. The worst moment? You mixed up 2 entire letters. One man told a widow she reminded him of his deceased mother. The other told a bakery apprentice she made him feel like a warm stew on a cold night. Neither recipient appreciated the swap. After that, things unraveled. Some clients kept pretending they wrote the letters. Others blamed you when their relationships fell apart. One woman said your poem was the reason she got dumped. It included the line, "Love is a car with one wheel. It only works if we lean the same way." You thought it was clever. She thought it was an insult to her balance. You stopped taking requests for a while, claimed hand cramps, hid your inkwell. You needed time to recover and reorganize your thoughts, and possibly your sense of poetic restraint. But deep down you still liked writing them. There was something soothing about putting affection into words, even if they weren't for you. Even if you were the one helping other people say what you've never said out loud yourself. You still have copies of all the letters stored in a little box under your desk. You tell yourself it's for record keeping, but you keep rereading one of them. You didn't write it for anyone, not yet. You've helped all kinds of people find love, shy ones, loud ones, ones who think love is just a polite handshake. You've matched goat herders, mushroom fanatics, a man who only talks in rhymes, and a woman who once tried to marry a scarecrow during a lightning storm. That's a long story. You don't talk about it anymore. But even with your success rate, if you ignore the pie-related breakup and that one couple who eloped with each other's cousins, people still ask the same thing. So why are you still single? It's asked like a casual question, but it always comes with a squint. The kind that says, what are you hiding under that calm exterior? A secret lover? A skeleton? A scroll that says, love is a scam? Your aunt asks it while ladling soup. The baker's wife brings it up whenever her cousin passes through. He smells like wet bread and once tried to impress you with a poem about butter. Even the local goat boy asked once while cleaning his boots, if you're so good at love, why don't you do it yourself? You've got answers. So many answers. You've said you're too busy, that your heart is under renovation, that your scroll system doesn't support self-matching. You've also blamed the stars, Mercury, and once, incorrectly, a potato shortage. The truth is messier. You know how love works, you know how it doesn't. You've seen people light up and fall apart. You've watched hopeful smiles turn into awkward silences over bad stew and badly timed truths. You've seen it all up close and kept notes. Love to you isn't some dreamy idea. It's work, it's timing, it's compromise and cold feet, and hoping someone won't mind your habit of muttering match scores in your sleep. You're not against it. You just haven't made space for it. Maybe you're scared. Maybe you're comfortable. Maybe you've spent so long helping others, you forgot to notice the space in your own story where someone else could fit. Sometimes, late at night, when your candle burns low and your tea goes cold, you think about what it would feel like to be chosen, not as the helper or the fixer, but just for being you. Weird, careful, overly organized you. You imagine receiving a letter, not one you wrote, not one filled with someone else's feelings. Just something simple. I see you, I'd like to try. It would probably make you cry. You'd probably pretend it was from a client. You'd definitely read it 10 times and hide it under your mattress. But until then, you smile when people ask. You tell them, it's not my season yet. You say, I'm letting the scrolls breathe. Then you turn the topic back to them, because that's safer. Because the truth is, you don't know the answer. But you think, just maybe, you'd like to find out. It starts the way these things always do, with someone new and far too interesting. He arrives on a Tuesday, which is already suspicious. Nobody interesting arrives on a Tuesday. He's polite, clean, and doesn't smell like mud, cheese, or regret. That alone should have made you nervous. Then he smiled and something inside you, something you've carefully locked in a drawer labeled "Not Now," moved. He says he's visiting, just passing through. Maybe looking for a match. Maybe looking for something else. You nod, reach for your quill, and write absolutely nothing because your hand has forgotten how to function. You grab the teacup instead and almost pour it onto a scroll. Good start. He asks about your process. You explain it calmly, even though your voice has developed a sudden squeak. He laughs, not at you, but warmly. It makes things worse. You do what you always do. You open a new scroll, begin a profile, and start checking boxes you don't normally check. He scores high. Too high on everything. You even run him through your emotional humidity chart. He rates off the scale. You write suspiciously ideal in the margins. You tell yourself this is just a professional reaction. Some clients are charming, some clients are unusually well groomed, some clients remember how you take your tea. It means nothing, except it doesn't feel like nothing. So because you're responsible and smart and entirely unprepared, you do the only logical thing. You match him with someone else. Her name is Beata. She owns goats, has a calm smile, and once carried her cousin home from a festival without complaint. You think they'll get along. You hope they'll get along. You might be the only one who doesn't want it to work. You see them near the well later that week. He's handing her a piece of bread. She's laughing. You don't even know what's worse, his smile or how easy it looks. Someone whispers, "They're perfect together." You nod. It feels like agreeing to your own eviction. Back in your office, you spend an entire afternoon reorganizing your scrolls by moon phase and goat count. You create a new category labeled Unmatched Potential, Do Not Touch. You pretend it's for everyone else, but it's not. You think about the way he looked at you like you weren't just the one behind the scrolls, like maybe you had stories too, like maybe he wanted to hear them. You bury the thought deep. You've never been in love. You've studied it, charted it, matched it. You've listened to tearful stories and hopeful plans, but this fluttery, unpredictable, inconvenient feeling is not part of your system. You go back to your notes, you write someone else's name, you pretend not to think about how he tilted his head when he listened. You pretend even harder not to imagine what it would be like if he stayed. This wasn't supposed to happen. You're the matchmaker. You observe, you assist, you guide. You do not get involved, but now you're involved. And it's messy and it's quiet and it's sitting just behind your ribcage waiting to be noticed, which is very, very inconvenient. You tell yourself it's fine. Everything is fine. You are a professional. You have a job. You help people fall in love. You do not fall apart over someone who now brings bread to someone else. To prove how fine you are, you reorganize your scrolls, then your desk, then your sock drawer. You relabel every ink pot just in case they were the problem. You even sharpen your quills with more force than necessary. The goose feathers look frightened. You create a new scroll category called Definitely Fine, Please Stop Asking. It's got one name in it, and a small drawing of a loaf of bread being stabbed by a quill. You try to match other people, but it's hard when everything reminds you of him. One client says he likes quiet people. You remember the way the stranger laughed softly when you said, "Romance is just socially acceptable emotional paperwork." Another client mentions long walks and your brain yells, "Boots. Nice boots." You're starting to resent boots. You also start questioning your own system. You look at the scrolls and wonder if any of it means anything. You consider changing Beata's star sign just to see what happens. You don't. But you do draw a small frown face next to it, just for balance. You try journaling. The first page says, "I am completely fine." The second page says, "Okay, maybe not." The third page is a long, dramatic list of all the things you never said, like, "You have a very organized smile," and "I like the way you ask questions like you want to know the answer." You write a letter. You don't plan to send it. It starts with, "Dear you," and ends with, "Why did you have to smile so much?" You fold it up and hide it inside your emergency jam jar. Emotional jam, you call it. It tastes like raspberry and quiet heartbreak. Your clients start noticing something is off. One asks if you've been sleeping. You say yes, but your face says, "I've been staring at the ceiling like it owes me answers." A child hands you a flower and says, "This is for your sadness." You cry into a curtain and say it's allergies. You keep working, you keep smiling, you plan someone else's engagement feast while mentally planning a dramatic retreat into the forest. You almost go through with it, but remember, the forest doesn't have tea. You are not okay, but you are operational.
Love is still happening. Around you. Without you. Because of you. And every now and then, when no one's watching, you open your jam jar, unfold the letter, and read it one more time.
Then you fold it up, put it away, and get back to work. Because someone, somewhere, is waiting for their match. Even if it's not you, you really believed it was done. You'd pushed down the feelings, tucked away the scroll with his name on it, and convinced yourself that it was just a passing crush, the emotional equivalent of a stubbed toe. Sure, it hurt for a bit, but it would fade. Probably. Hopefully. Eventually. You focused on work. You matched two farmers who both hated onions and loved quiet. You helped a shepherd write vows that made his partner cry, mostly in a good way. You even cleaned your window. It didn't help much, but it felt like progress. To truly move on, you started sorting your regrets into categories. Mild embarrassments, lingering feelings, and unsent letters that may or may not be poetry. There were a lot more scrolls in that last pile than you expected.
You even gave up bread for a week, just in case. It didn't make you feel better, but it made you very cranky. You told people you were fasting for spiritual clarity. You were actually just avoiding all items that reminded you of shared tea and stolen glances.
Then, just as your heart started settling into its new rhythm of slightly disappointed acceptance, he came back. You looked up from your scroll cabinet, and there he was, holding a loaf of bread and looking far too calm for someone casually strolling back into your carefully repressed emotions. He said hello, he said he'd been thinking, he said he had left because he needed space but came back because every road reminded him of something you said about love and goats and terrible stew. You tried to respond with dignity. What came out was, "Would you like some tea?" He said yes. You made the good tea. You even used the cup without the crack in it. That's how serious this was. He looked around your office like it felt familiar, like he'd missed it. He asked if you were still matching people. You said yes, still writing scrolls, still giving advice, still pretending your own heart was a completely neutral bystander. Then he said the words that completely undid you. "I was hoping you matched me wrong on purpose." Your brain shorted out. You smiled. You laughed. He laughed too, nervously. You reached for your drawer without thinking and pulled out the scroll. His name was there, written weeks ago. Not matched. Just held. You handed it to him. He read it. He smiled. You waited for the floor to open up. It didn't. That was both a relief and a shame. He didn't say anything clever. He didn't need to. He just sat beside you and said, "So what happens now?" You thought about it. You thought about stars and stew and all the reasons love was terrible and inconvenient and wildly unpredictable. And then you said, "Now we see if this works. No guarantees, no scrolls, just us." He nodded. You made more tea. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't planned.
But it was yours.
Finally, you've always been the one with the answers. When someone was confused, heartbroken, or just lonely and making poor decisions near livestock, they came to you. You had scrolls, systems, and strongly worded advice. Now, for the first time, you are completely and utterly winging it. He visits often, not in a dramatic, sweeping way, just quiet and regular, like tea or chores or mild dread. He brings things sometimes, tea, a new story, a very small pie that he says is a gift, but looks suspiciously like he already took a bite. You act like everything is normal, but every time he walks in, your stomach performs what can only be described as interpretive dance. Sometimes you talk, sometimes you don't. Once you sat in silence for 20 minutes watching a spider cross your windowsill, and it was oddly comforting. More comforting than some of your actual dates. Not that you've had many, not that you've had any. You keep doing your job. You still scribble notes like, excellent laugh, but maybe cursed. And you still warn people about marrying someone who can't make soup. But now, while you're matching other people, you catch yourself wondering what kind of match you would be. You try to prepare, you study yourself like you're one of your clients, you journal, but your entries come out sounding like performance reviews. Good sense of humor, mild control issues, strong aversion to sudden vulnerability. You make a list of conversation topics in case things get serious. Shared hobbies, opinions on soup consistency, and how to be emotionally available without sounding like you're reading from a scroll. The list is not helpful. He notices your nervousness, but he doesn't tease. He just listens. He asks how your day went and genuinely waits for an answer. When you tell him you have no idea what you're doing, he says, "Me neither," and smiles like that's perfectly okay. You used to think falling in love would feel like writing the perfect match, neat, balanced, ready for filing. Instead, it feels like walking into a room you thought you knew and realizing someone rearranged all the furniture. It's scary, it's unpredictable, and it's kind of thrilling. You don't have a scroll for this, you don't have a rule book or a 5-step plan or even a compatibility diagram. All you have is someone who keeps showing up and doesn't mind when you say, "I'm not sure how this works." So when he reaches for your hand, and you don't flinch or check the moon phase first, you realize this might actually be how it begins. Not with a chart, not with a grand theory, but with a very small pie, and someone who doesn't leave when you admit you're scared. You're not the expert this time, you're just someone learning how to love like everyone else. It's weird, but it's working. You were convinced that once things started happening, you'd be calm, maybe even graceful. You imagined yourself handling your feelings with quiet wisdom and steady hands. In reality, your brain now reacts to his presence like someone just set off fireworks inside a teacup. He comes over like it's normal. Like sitting in your office with tea and a biscuit is just something people do. And sure, people do that. But people don't usually make your entire bloodstream feel like it's learning to dance badly. You try to stay cool. You even practice questions ahead of time. Things like, "How was your day?" or "Would you like some more jam?" But as soon as he sits in that squeaky chair, yes, the same one that always sounds like a duck having an opinion, your mind empties entirely. You ask him how goats work. He says, "With legs mostly." You nod, like that's the cleverest thing anyone's ever said. Later, you try to walk across the room. You walk directly into a table. You try to play it off by pretending the table was in the wrong. He politely agrees with you. The table does not. You offer him a snack. You slice the bread sideways. You drop the knife. You try to salvage it by arranging everything at a dramatic angle and calling it emotional plating. He says it looks great. You consider writing him into your will. You explain how your match system works. You talk about your charts and compatibility scores and why two people who both love pickled turnips should never be in the same room. He listens. He asks questions. You try to sound like an expert, but then compare romantic communication to chicken trading, and now that metaphor lives in the world forever. You don't know why he keeps coming back. You're awkward. You ramble. You've spilled ink on your sleeve twice this week alone. But he does come back. With tea, with jokes. With that quiet way of looking at you like he sees something past all the scrolls and the nervous bread cutting.
You try to act like this is normal, that this is just another connection, just another conversation.
But it's not. You've helped so many people fall in love. You've designed systems and solved problems and played emotional matchmaker with the efficiency of a librarian sorting chaos. And now none of that seems to help because you can't predict how many heartbeats he'll take with him when he leaves your office. You want to tell him everything. How you never planned for this. How you don't know what you're doing. How your heart is having a very strange week. Instead, you say, "Thanks for stopping by." He smiles, you melt internally, you are not cool. You are barely holding it together, but you're learning that love isn't about having it together. It's about showing up, even with crooked toast and metaphors about poultry. And for once, you're letting that be enough. You have helped over 30 couples navigate the murky waters of romance using nothing but scrolls, strong intuition, and a working knowledge of goat-related behavior. You've handled sobbing breakups, passive-aggressive bread offerings, and one proposal that involved fireworks and a near-death experience. You've told people when they're not ready and told others when it's okay to try again. You've smoothed over more awkward courtships than the village priest has boiled potatoes. But this moment right here is the hardest thing you've ever done. Because now, it's your turn. For weeks you've been pretending this feeling you have for him is just professional interest, maybe mild admiration, possibly a slight crush that would pass with time, like seasonal allergies. You've convinced yourself that what you feel is admiration for his ability to make tea correctly and use humor gently. Definitely not romantic, definitely not serious, definitely not why you've been writing practice confession letters behind your schedule chart. You've written 6 drafts, you've burned 2. You've practiced in the mirror to your teacup, and once to a very confused chicken. You've tried to make the words sound simple, honest, adult. They keep coming out like you've swallowed a scroll and are trying to quote it from memory. Today, you've had enough. You straighten your tunic, you light your emotionally composed candle, which smells like cinnamon and possibly fear. And you tell yourself that if you can get 2 people with rival goats to fall in love, you can tell one man you like his smile. When he walks in, you panic immediately. He says hello. You say, "Welcome to the scroll zone." He pauses. You want to vanish into the floor. He compliments your candle. You tell him it's from the Panic but Romantic collection. He laughs. You nearly throw your teacup in relief. You make him tea. Your hands shake just a little, so you tell him it's a new pouring technique called agitated steeping. He nods politely. You think he might be humoring you, but you're too far in now. You sit down, you stare at the floor, then the table, then his face. You try to remember the words you practiced, but they've all hidden behind your ribs. So instead, you blurt, "I like you," not in the "I appreciate your bread gifts" way, in the "I want to sit next to you even when we have nothing to say" kind of way. There's a moment. Your heart decides this would be a great time to beat like a festival drum. Your face goes hot. Your mouth refuses to close. And then he smiles. A real one. The kind that makes you feel like you just said something very brave and very foolish and somehow very correct. He doesn't say anything clever, just good, because I like you too. You forget how breathing works. You stare. He reaches for his tea, drinks, asks, "Now what?" You don't have a plan, so you tell the truth again. "I don't know. I've never done this part before."
You both laugh quietly, nervously, hopefully.
Later that night, you write it down on a scroll. Feelings declared. Subject receptive. Possible future. Emotional tea intake. High. You file it under your own story. And for the first time, you don't just underline it. You leave it open. Now that everything is out in the open, your feelings, your confession, your incredibly professional choice to say "scroll zone" during a vulnerable moment, you'd think the hard part is over. You've said the scary thing. He didn't run. In theory, this should feel amazing, or at least calm. Instead, it feels like your heart has taken up percussion and your brain is throwing small furniture around. He keeps showing up, not in a dramatic way, just in the casual, devastating kind. He brings tea, he hums while he waits. He has taken to calling the squeaky chair his spot. Somehow it's not awful. Sometimes he just sits there and listens to you ramble about charts, goat-based personality theories, and the emotional risks of stew sharing. He listens, like really listens. And that might be the scariest thing of all. You're used to being the expert, the helper, the person with answers. But now you're the one fumbling through small talk, worried you're saying too much or not enough, or accidentally revealing that you once sorted potential matches based on handwriting style. He asks what you want out of this. You panic and say, stability, mild emotional touch, and no excessive blinking. He laughs, takes your hand, doesn't blink excessively. Perfect score. You're afraid you'll mess this up, not just for you, but for him, because you've spent so long giving advice from a distance that you don't know how to walk into love without a map. You worry you'll analyze every moment, chart every smile, and somehow miss the part where you're just supposed to feel it. He says he likes your brain, even when it spirals. He says he likes your honesty, even when it's buried in metaphors about weather patterns and baking utensils. He says he likes you. Not just the Matchmaker version, the real one, the one who eats jam straight from the jar and talks to herself while organizing scrolls. People in the village have noticed you've been handed 3 unsolicited pies and 1 wink from the mayor. Someone left a note outside your door that simply said, "About time." You're too afraid to ask who wrote it. Your clients still come. You still give them advice. But now, when they ask if they're doing love right, you take a deep breath, smile and say, if it feels weird and scary but also kind of wonderful, you probably are. Because you finally get it. Love isn't a clean formula. It's not always predictable. Sometimes it arrives late, spills tea on your best parchment, and sits in your squeaky chair like it's always belonged there. You still keep notes, still scribble observations, still file things away carefully. And now there's one scroll in the cabinet that doesn't have a match attached. Just a name, yours, written in your own handwriting, with a bright orange string.
Because this time, you're not matching anyone else.
You're learning how to match yourself. You're not used to planning your own future. You're the one who helps other people imagine theirs. You give advice like, compromise is important, and make sure they don't chew with their mouth open at formal gatherings. You coach nervous lovers through proposals, arguments, and the delicate politics of sharing blankets. Your life has always been about everyone else's next step. But now you're catching yourself wondering about your own. It starts small. You imagine eating with someone who won't judge your overuse of jam. You picture mornings where you wake up and someone has already made the tea. You wonder what it would be like to have someone in the room who doesn't need anything from you except your presence. Preferably someone who knows not to speak before breakfast. You don't say any of this out loud. You'd rather eat a scroll, but you're thinking about it, and you're noticing things, like how he says "we" now when he talks about plans, like how he leaves his cup beside yours as if it belongs there, like how he laughs when you try to explain your filing system for emotionally unpredictable villagers and doesn't look like he wants to flee.
He doesn't just visit anymore. He lingers. He brings pastries that he claims are for both of you, but he always eats the first one. He listens when you talk about the logic behind pairings, even when it turns into a rant about how 2 people who both dislike soup can never truly coexist. He tells you that you don't need to explain so much. You tell him that's adorable, and then immediately start explaining something else.
You wonder what it would be like to share your space, not temporarily, not as a guest, but for good. You'd have to warn him that your version of relaxing involves counting ink pots and silently ranking village gossip. He'd probably be fine with it. He once listened to you talk about scroll string colors for 20 whole minutes without yawning. You start doing test runs in your head. Could he live with the squeaky chair? Could he learn to ignore the smell of burnt thyme? Would he survive your system of color-coded towel rotation? These are important questions.
One day, you write his name on a scroll, not as a match, not as a client, just his name next to yours. You stare at it for a long time. It looks like it belongs there. You don't file it. You fold it and tuck it into your teacup like it's something sacred.
When he arrives later that day, you hand him the cup. He doesn't ask what it means, he just reads it, smiles, and gently places it on your desk like it's always been there. Then he asks, "Want to go for a walk?"
You say yes. Not because it's in your schedule, not because it's part of some 5-step compatibility sequence, but because you want to. Because you can. Because you're tired of only planning other people's futures.
And this time, yours looks kind of nice.
Weird, but nice, like jam on soup. Surprising, but maybe just right.
The word date finally makes its way into a conversation, and you nod like it's a perfectly ordinary idea. Inside, your brain starts hyperventilating. You've advised others on dates countless times. Don't overthink it, be yourself, avoid goats unless absolutely necessary, but you've never actually done this yourself. The idea that someone might take you out to do something pleasant and possibly romantic is both thrilling and deeply alarming. You spend far too long deciding what to wear. Your nicest tunic is out. It smells faintly of ink and emergency jam. Your second nicest is acceptable, although it has an unfortunate tear that you choose to call a ventilation slit. You briefly consider bringing scrolls to feel more confident, but realize walking into a date with a clipboard is a strong way to say, "I am here to assess, not connect." You plan a walk, gentle, low pressure. Just two people walking and maybe holding hands. Maybe even having a meaningful conversation that doesn't involve goat classifications. It sounds lovely.
The universe disagrees.
First, the sky opens up with a level of rain that feels personal. Then, halfway down the path, a goat joins you. You don't know where it came from. It doesn't belong to either of you. It simply appears, chooses chaos, and follows you like it's auditing the date. You reach a bench and decide to take a moment. The bench, perhaps sensing your emotional instability, breaks the second you sit down. You both land in a patch of mud that smells like wet thyme and humble pie. The goat stands nearby, chewing on what might be your dignity. You apologize profusely, trying to brush off the mud while also brushing off your rising panic. He laughs, genuinely. You try to laugh too, but it comes out more like a wheeze. He says, "At least we'll remember this," and you wonder how many points a date loses for physical injury. You press on. You try small talk. He mentions his favorite pastry. You respond with an impromptu lecture about how the structure of stew reflects one's ability to handle emotional complexity. He listens politely. Then he reaches for your hand, and just as your heart leaps, your foot finds a loose rock. You fall into him. Again. You both go down in a heap, the goat watching like a judgmental third wheel. The rest of the walk is soggy and slightly limpy. Back at your office, you both towel off and drink the kind of tea that tastes like, well, we survived that. You ask him, nervously, curiously, cautiously, what he likes about you. You expect something vague. He surprises you. He says, "You care so much, and you try so hard to hide it. And I like that you don't hide it well." You try to thank him, but the only words your mouth produces are, "Your elbows are exceptionally well designed." He nods, accepts the compliment, and doesn't run away. You eat a couple of overly crispy scones. He tells you about his childhood goose, which hated everyone but him. You tell him about the two anti-chair soulmates you matched last year. The match failed. The story didn't. You don't kiss. You don't even try. But your elbows rest against each other, and they stay there. Warm, casual, meaningful. Later that night, you update your files. Date number 1, torrential rain, emotional turbulence, unsolicited goat, bench, casualty, elbow victory. You underline it, then you draw a heart. It's still lopsided, you leave it that way, on purpose. After the date, you expected things to feel different, like maybe the world would glow a little, or birds would sing with more harmony. Instead, your boots are still muddy, your scrolls are still disorganized, and you still feel like someone who just tripped into the concept of affection with zero warning and only a backup quill. The next day, he shows up with bread. Not a gift, just bread. The kind people bring when they want to stay a while, but don't want to make it weird. You let him in, offer him tea, and both pretend the goat-related events of yesterday were a dream. A very vivid, slightly damp dream. You talk, though not very well. You ramble about scroll repairs and weather patterns. He listens like it's poetry. Then he starts talking, and you panic, because now it's your turn to listen, and listening is fine, until he says something nice and your brain melts into warm pudding. He compliments your handwriting. You drop your teacup. He asks what you're working on. You lie and say it's a recipe for jam, even though the scroll clearly reads, Top 10 romantic disasters involving bread. He stays. A long time. You keep waiting for him to leave, but he doesn't. And not in a clinging, awkward way, he just belongs there. Sitting in the squeaky chair, reading your ridiculous book on spleen harmony, and occasionally smiling at you like you're not a complete mess of nerves and half-formed confessions. You ask him if this is what dating feels like. He shrugs and says, I think so. But with less mud, hopefully. Then he asks if it's okay to keep showing up like this. You nod, and it feels like the most adult decision you've ever made, second only to that time you decided not to put onions on the compatibility questionnaire. The days start changing, slowly. Your scrolls are still full, your clients still frustrating, your office still smells like time and spilled ink. But now there's a second teacup on your desk, a second chair by the window, 2 spoons in the jam jar. You're still awkward, still overthinking. You still forget to say important things until it's too late. But now, when you do, he just smiles and waits, gives you time. Lets you spiral a little, then tugs you gently back. You once told someone that love was about patience and shared space. You didn't realize that space could be as small as your desk and as quiet as 2 people eating bread in synchronized silence. You start adding your own name to your scrolls, not as a match, but as a note, a reminder that even you, the matchmaker, can be part of the thing you've helped others find. You file it under ongoing projects. And this time, you leave space for additions. You don't suddenly wake up wise, mature, and glowing with emotional competence. If anything, you wake up with toast crumbs on your chin and a scroll stuck to your forehead. But something's different. You're not as panicked as you used to be. You no longer rehearse your greetings before he shows up. You haven't checked the moon cycle in 3 days. That's progress. You're still awkward, still prone to accidental metaphors about weather and feelings. But now, when he smiles at your nonsense, you don't hide behind a teacup. You hand him one. He takes it. Like that's normal. Like this is what people do. He visits almost daily now, sometimes with bread, sometimes with news, once with a frog, which he claimed was a gift. You named it Sir Ribbit, and now it guards your windowsill with damp indifference. Your conversations are less curated. You say things like, I had a dream I married a stew, and he just nods thoughtfully and says, was it a good stew? You no longer feel like you have to impress him with cleverness, which is good, because you once tried to compliment his patience and ended up calling him emotionally absorbent. He seems to like the real you, not the matchmaker, not the advice dispenser, just you, the person who arranges quills by emotional intensity and eats jam with a spoon straight from the jar. You've started to believe he's not pretending, and that belief, that tiny, stubborn belief, might be the most dangerous thing you've allowed into your life since the exploding courtship pie of last autumn. Even the villagers have noticed. The baker started handing you 2 scones instead of 1. The candle vendor gave you a discount on romance-scented wax. Someone left a hand-knitted tea cozy on your desk. It reads, 2 sugars, 1 future. You tried to return it, but no one claimed it. It now lives on your teapot. One afternoon, he asks if you've always been this meticulous. You say yes. Then you confess you once organized your feelings into a diagram that compared attraction to soup temperature. He laughs. Not at you, just enough to make you feel seen. You still do your job, you still match people, you still caution clients not to date their cousins, but something's shifted. Now, when you give someone hope, you don't sound like you're quoting from a manual. You sound like someone who finally understands what they're talking about. You rewrite your personal scroll again. This time, it has more than one line. Nervous but steady, curious but cautious. Possibly building something real. You leave the string untied, then because it feels right, you draw a small frog in the corner, so Ribbit approves. You used to tell people that love grows like herbs in bad soil, slowly, unpredictably, and occasionally full of bugs. You said it couldn't be rushed, that it needed patience and sun and metaphorical compost. But lately, you're wondering if that was just your way of avoiding it altogether. Because this, whatever this is between you and him, it sprouted fast, it bloomed sideways, and now it's taking up space in your life like a potted fern you keep forgetting to water, but somehow it thrives anyway. He comes in without knocking now, not in an invasive way, more like someone who knows where the squeaky floorboard is and how you like your tea. He doesn't ask before sitting in the good chair. He just shows up like a punctuation mark at the end of your day, usually a comma, occasionally a semicolon when things get emotional. You've made room for him, slowly and without realizing it. His coat is on your hook. His tea is next to yours. You keep a second spoon in the jar, not because you planned to, but because he used it once and now it feels wrong when it's missing. One morning, you even hummed while organizing scrolls. He hummed back. It wasn't in tune, but it was in sync. You're not pretending anymore. The extra slice of bread isn't for a client. The second teacup isn't decorative. The fire you keep going in the hearth isn't just for warmth. You've stopped calling this a nice companionship. You've started calling it what it is, at least in your journal. Something real. Underlined twice. One evening, you fall asleep together in your office. Not dramatically. No swooning. Just two people who meant to drink tea and talk for an hour and accidentally made it 3. When you wake up, he's got one of your scrolls on his chest like a napkin. You consider taking a mental photo. Instead, you write about it later and add a sketch. It's not very good, but it gets the point across. You say things now, honest things like, I missed you and please don't eat the last biscuit unless you really need it emotionally. He answers with things like, I'd rather be here than anywhere else, and I saved you the corner with extra jam. Once, during a quiet moment, you told him, if I ever match you with someone else by accident, just know it's because I've finally lost my mind. He replied, I'd burn the scroll. With dignity, the villagers have fully committed to their role as background cheerleaders. Someone knit you both a matching scarf. Another left a carved wooden heart on your doorstep with the words official couple etched in tiny, judgmental letters. You now receive more unsolicited pastries than official scrolls. You used to imagine love as this sweeping, dramatic thing, full of grand gestures and poetic declarations. Turns out it's much quieter, more like shared elbow space, lukewarm tea, and arguing over whether jam qualifies as a fruit. You maintain it does. He insists it's a lifestyle. You're not pretending anymore, not about the feelings, not about the future, not even about the way you now write his name in the margin of your to-do lists just to see it there. This is real. And for the first time in your life, you're not cataloguing it. You're living it.
With a full teacup
And a second spoon. One morning, you see his boots next to yours and don't have a small internal meltdown. That's progress. Normally something that domestic would send you into a spiral of overthinking and backup contingency scrolls. But today you nudge them together so the toes line up, then go make tea like it's the most ordinary thing in the world. He's still here. Not just visiting, he lingers, leaves things, remembers how many sugars you take, calls your scroll cabinet a beautiful nightmare, and somehow makes that sound affectionate. He's part of your day now, the part between panic about clients and accidentally burn toast. You haven't had the big conversation. No one has said the word future out loud with serious eyebrows, but it's there. In the little things, like the way you label one drawer jam reserves and he doesn't question it. Like how your teacups have unofficially paired up. Like how he brings extra bread without asking because you once, 4 weeks ago, said you like crusty ends. You've started writing notes to yourself with a little doodle in the margin that means him. He's taken to scribbling comments in your scroll margins. Things like too much goat content or romantic tension 6.5 out of 10. You don't erase them, you circle them. You file them under things that make you grin at inappropriate moments. Sometimes you bicker, not the bad kind. The do we organize tea by mood or flavor kind. You say mood, obviously. He says flavor because apparently that's what normal people do. You end up creating a cross-reference tea matrix. Sir Ribbit the Frog judges you from the windowsill, as he always does. Clients still come. You still give advice. You still say things like, communicate openly and don't propose using interpretive dance unless you're sure. But now you believe it in a way you didn't before, because now you know what it feels like when someone stays. When they listen, when they laugh at your worst joke and leave the last scone without a fight. One rainy afternoon, you ask him what he thinks the future looks like. He shrugs and says, same teacups, more soup, maybe a slightly less anxious you. Then he pokes your nose and adds, maybe.
You write that down, not in a scroll, in your journal with the doodle. You've spent your life helping others fall in love, always assuming you were just the guide, never the traveler. But now you're walking the path too. Slowly, steadily, with someone who knows you're weird and likes it anyway.
This might actually last, which is terrifying and lovely.
And the jam is still not alphabetized,
but somehow it's okay. You never used to plan ahead, not for yourself anyway. You were happy enough helping other people sort through their future hopes, shared goat dreams, and mutual laundry expectations. But when it came to your own future, that was a mystery best left in a locked scroll drawer. Lately, though, the drawer's been creaking open. It starts small. You think about what it might be like to share your soap dish, your tea shelf, your blanket. You catch yourself wondering whether he prefers windows that let in morning light or ones that creak ominously during storms. You imagine living in a house that has enough room for 2 people and 1 frog with strong opinions. You bring it up over toast, casually. You say, if we ever had a place with 2 doors, which one would you want to dramatically exit from during arguments? He thinks for a moment and says, the back one. I feel it has more flair. You write that down. He leaves his scarf on your hook now, not once. Repeatedly. Like it lives there. You haven't moved it. You caught yourself brushing lint off it. Once, you folded his socks, which is wild, considering your own socks live in what can only be described as a chaotic sock swamp. You start to imagine real things. Not swooning under the stars or dramatic reunions on bridges, but sitting in matching chairs and disagreeing about which shelf should hold the emergency jam. You think about mornings with shared toast and occasional grumbling. Even the arguments sound sort of comfortable. You test more waters. You ask, do you ever think about what happens after this? He chews, thinks, says, you mean after we run out of tea and emotionally supportive frogs? You clarify. He says, of course I think about it. I think about waking up next to someone who talks to herself and labels herbs with adjectives. I think about eating scones that are definitely burned and pretending they're rustic. I think about you every day. You pretend not to cry. It doesn't work. Later, you update your scroll. The personal one. The one that used to just say, avoid entanglements in all caps. You add a section called Future Nonsense. Underneath it, you list 2 toothbrushes, no judgment. Shared jam access. Seasonal sock harmony. 1 open door, and then you draw a house, again. This time it has 2 chimneys for balance, a garden that might be weeds, and a very judgmental frog in the window. It's not a plan, but it feels like the start of one. There's a word you haven't said yet. It's a small word, only 4 letters, but somehow it feels like trying to lift a horse with your eyebrows. You've written it for other people, tucked it into scrolls, whispered it across tables between clients like you're passing contraband, but you've never said it to him. It's not because you don't feel it. You do. In fact, you feel it constantly, like a small bell ringing softly in your chest every time he smiles at you from behind the jam jars. You feel it when he pours your tea without asking how you like it. You feel it when he tells you he's reorganized your ink bottles again and you don't even yell. But saying it out loud, that's a leap, a commitment, a potential emotional landslide you're not sure you've packed properly for. So you do what you always do. You circle around it. You say things like, "You make my life slightly more tolerable," and "You're the only person I'd share my good spoon with." He nods, smiles, and says things like, "You look nice today," confident, like someone who's tamed a squirrel. And you take that as the compliment it clearly is. You've tried practicing. You whispered it once into your pillow, then immediately apologized to the pillow for being too forward. You tested it on Sir Ribbit, but he blinked once and jumped into your tea. You even wrote it in a scroll draft. It looked good there, solid, believable, like something a person could actually say. But when you're around him, the word gets stuck, right there on the tip of your tongue between you and matter. It doesn't come out, not yet.
One evening, he's telling you a story about his neighbour's haunted chicken coop, and you're laughing so hard your tea spills. You wipe your mouth, look up, and suddenly there it is again. That feeling. Big, soft, kind of terrifying, like standing on the edge of something very tall but very safe. You take a breath. You open your mouth
And you say, "Your elbows are extremely trustworthy." There's a pause. He raises one of those trustworthy elbows. "I moisturize," he says. You both laugh. He reaches over and takes your hand like he's been waiting for the moment, even if it didn't arrive the way either of you expected. Later, you update your scroll. The one with your name and all the almosts. You write, "Didn't say it. Definitely meant it. Elbow, compliment delivered. With intensity. Possibly progress." You draw a heart. It's weirdly shaped. You draw another. It's worse. You add a tiny elbow between them. It feels right. You'll get there. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But soon. Probably. And if he says it first, you've already planned your reaction. Stunned silence, followed by a dramatic gasp, then a casual, "I was just about to say that." Permanence used to sound like trouble, not the fun kind, but the heavy, overcooked stew kind, the kind that clings to your life and demands matching towels and coordinated futures. You thought of it as a slow squeeze, something that wrapped around your independence and politely smothered it. But somehow, without any announcements or declarations, permanence has turned into something else. It looks less like being trapped and more like 2 teacups drying on the same towel. It feels less like giving up your space and more like discovering your space had a spare chair all along, and he brought his own cushion. You've started to adjust things, quietly. Your living area is still your own, but now there's a small shelf that holds both your tea blend and his. Your desk still belongs to you, but there's a second inkwell on the corner with his initials, and you pretend not to notice when he uses your favorite quill and puts it back wrong. You rearranged your pantry slightly, not because you needed more room, but because he keeps leaving his favorite biscuits there for emergencies, which seems to be code for whenever he visits. You haven't had a conversation about moving in, or about forever, or about what you'll do when the goat market crashes. But you did give him a key. You said it was for emergencies. He said, "So, daily emergencies?" You didn't answer. Now when he visits, he doesn't knock. He just pushes the door open, sets down whatever treat he brought, usually warm, and says something like, "I nearly got trampled by a goose today." Want to hear about it over tea? You do, every time. You've begun using the word we more often, and it doesn't feel like a lie. We're out of time. We need to wash the jam spoon. We agreed that a frog on the table is not unhygienic if it's wearing a leaf. He nods. He understands your logic. Or at least he doesn't argue out loud. There's a rhythm now, a pattern. You talk while folding towels. He listens while reorganizing your spices. You both make plans that start with maybe, but end with together. The other night, while sorting a delivery of scroll paper, he looked up and said, "This feels like home." You blinked. You nodded. You dropped a quill and blamed it on the floor being slippery, even though it wasn't. That night, you opened your private scroll. The one with scribbles, doodles, and all the half-formed ideas you've never said out loud. You started a new entry. Permanence may not be a trap. It might just be a comfortable chair with room for one more ridiculous human. You underline it. Then, for no reason at all, you draw a pair of boots by the door, a frog by the fire, and 2 tea mugs on the windowsill. The mugs are slightly uneven. The frog looks smug. The boots don't match. It's perfect. And that's when you realize you stopped bracing for the end a while ago. You've already started making room for the middle. You still haven't said it. Not the big word. The one that has 4 letters, a dramatic reputation, and the emotional power of a runaway bread cart. It's not that you're scared of saying it. Okay, you are. But not in the usual terrified of rejection way. More in the, if I say it, something huge and irreversible might happen and I still haven't organized the sock drawer kind of way. So you keep saying it with everything else.
You make him tea in your favorite mug, even though it's the only one that doesn't leak when tilted. You let him borrow your softest blanket, like the one that smells like time and denial. You organize his writing tools next to yours and pretend you didn't spend 10 minutes deciding which ink pot was least emotionally charged.
You make food. Bad food. You try to cook stew and end up with something between a broth and a confession. You hand it to him like it's gourmet. He eats it without blinking and says, "Very rustic?" You nod solemnly. It's emotionally seasoned. He grins like that's the nicest thing anyone's ever served him. You start doing little things, like leaving your journal open on a page that just happens to mention his name, like writing his initials into the corner of your to-do list under buy jam and figure out if this is real or I've finally gone soft, like tucking his scarf properly on the hook instead of letting it droop like your dignity usually does. You let him see you happy, not performative happy, not matchmaking success happy, just the quiet, unexpected kind that shows up when someone you like keeps coming back and isn't asking you to be anyone else. One evening, you walk in and find him fixing your lopsided stool. He's using twine, determination, and something that might be affection disguised as structural integrity. When you raise an eyebrow, he shrugs and says, "I was tired of watching you almost die every morning." You tell him that's the most aggressive way anyone has ever cared about you. Later, you're both sitting by the fire. He's reading something boring. You're pretending not to watch him read something boring. Eventually, you lean your head against his shoulder. No fuss. No warning. Just the quiet act of leaning in and staying there. He shifts a little. Then he rests his head on top of yours. No one says anything. And that somehow says everything. That night you open your scroll and draw a heart. Not because it's habit, but because it feels earned. You write underneath it. Didn't say it, didn't have to. Possibly yelled it with soup. You go to bed with the window open and the frog watching like he's seen this all before. You still haven't said it, but it's everywhere now.
And you're not scared of it anymore. You're just in it.
It starts like any other morning, fog in the air, slightly burnt toast on the table, and you arguing with a scroll about whether emotionally withdrawn counts as a romantic strength. You're mid-rant when he walks in carrying a basket that smells warm and suspicious. You ask if it's betrayal or scones, and he just shrugs and says, "I brought a thing." Inside the basket, muffins. Of course, Muffins again. He knows you don't trust muffins. Too soft, too unpredictable, like emotional landmines with jam centers. But he keeps bringing them like he's trying to win you over through pastry persistence. He claims it builds character. You claim muffins are structurally dishonest. You eat one, it's fine, maybe even good. Hard to tell with your nerves staging a full theatrical performance in your stomach, because today feels like it might be the day. The day you finally do the unthinkable. The day you say the word.
You don't plan it. You didn't rehearse. There's no grand gesture, no emotional overture played on invisible violins. It just happens. 1 second you're sipping tea and staring at a suspicious raisin, and the next he tells you that your outfit looks particularly matchmakery. He says it casually, like it's not going to unhinge your entire emotional framework.
And it does. Because instead of your usual deflection, something safe like, "Thanks, I styled it after seasonal parchment," you feel the word rising. It's there, sitting at the top of your throat, heavy and certain. You try to distract yourself by organizing quills. You check on Sir Ribbit, who's blinking in slow judgment from the window. You consider rearranging the entire spice shelf, but the word doesn't go away, so you look at him and you say it. "I love you." Just like that. No footnotes, no backpedaling, no jokes about soul binding via stew. Immediately, your brain hosts a conference on how this could go wrong. Maybe he'll drop the muffin. Maybe you'll have to pretend you sneezed. Maybe the ceiling will collapse in an act of dramatic irony. But none of that happens. He looks at you and he smiles, slowly, gently, like he's been waiting for this sentence to finally arrive on the page. "I know," he says. "Me too." And that's it. The world doesn't tilt. No muffins combust. The moment doesn't demand a parade. It just is. And somehow that's more powerful than any speech you could have fumbled your way through. You don't cry exactly, but your eyes might get suspiciously shiny. You pretend it's muffin steam. Then, in a gesture so wildly romantic it nearly unravels you, he offers you the last muffin. "You can have it," he says. "Love is sacrifice." You accept it with grace. And then you see it. "It's banana." He nods solemnly. Still counts. That night, you pull out the scroll you've avoided labeling for months, the one that's always hovered on the edge of someday. You don't hesitate. You write across the top in your neatest, clearest hand, "Official record of unexpected joy." And underneath you add, "Said the thing, he stayed, muffin situation unresolved, frog unimpressed, everything is good." You wake up, and for the first time in years, there's no urgent problem pressing against your thoughts, no heartbroken villager outside your door, no emergency involving incompatible love languages or romantic goat feuds. Just morning, quiet, warm, soft around the edges. You open your eyes and the light is golden, and you're still wrapped in the blanket he insisted was too scratchy until he stole it from you 3 nights in a row. He's already in the kitchen, clanging around with the chaotic energy of a man who thinks tea makes itself. You hear him humming off-key and mumbling about misplaced jam, and, for once, the noise doesn't make you roll your eyes. Instead, it grounds you. You stay in bed longer than usual, just listening to him exist nearby. Eventually, you shuffle out to find him standing barefoot, holding a spoon like a sword, and arguing with the teapot. You ask if he's winning. He says the spoon's surrendered. You sit at the table, and without asking, he slides your cup toward you just the way you like it. The jam is on the wrong shelf. The toast is uneven. The butter is too cold. It's perfect. The conversation is light, soft jokes, gentle teasing. He tells you a long story about a rooster that may or may not be cursed. You don't correct him. You just laugh when he gets animated and flings a breadcrumb at the wall. It sticks. Neither of you cleans it up. Sir Ribbit blinks slowly in judgment from his perch. You feel no guilt. You realize halfway through breakfast that this strange, peaceful rhythm is not temporary. It's not a pause, it's the start of something sustainable. You haven't made a schedule for the day. Your scrolls are untouched. And somehow the world hasn't collapsed. The matchmaking continues without your micromanagement. Your clients are surviving. Your office hasn't burned down. You're still doing the work. But now, when people ask what love looks like, you don't point to diagrams or, quote, spleen theories. You talk about quiet breakfasts, about shared silence, about knowing someone will be there in the morning, probably holding the wrong spoon, and how that's the whole point. You spend the afternoon together reading, half working, almost napping. He falls asleep on your shoulder during a particularly boring scroll. You don't move. Your arm goes numb. It's worth it. Later, you sit at your desk, journal open. You write, peace feels like toast crumbs, shared tea, and someone willing to listen to your full monologue about emotional ink ratios without blinking. You pause. Then you write, peace is quiet, but not lonely. And underneath that, I didn't know love could sound like this. You draw 2 teacups, one slightly chipped, and beside them you draw Sir Ribbit. Smiling. You're still the village matchmaker. That hasn't changed. You still keep records with maddening accuracy, still give advice based on instinct and poorly drawn charts, and still manage to scare people slightly when you say, I can tell by your posture that you're afraid of commitment. Your office still smells like time, wax, and the ghost of one very bad breakup from 5 years ago. But now, when people step inside, they notice something different. There are 2 cups on the table. Sometimes he's there, reading quietly, occasionally chuckling at a particularly bold client declaration. Sometimes he's bringing in bread, or rearranging the jam shelf, still claiming it's easier to reach emotionally. You haven't corrected him. You've simply stopped fighting the arrangement, just like you've stopped hiding the second chair, the spare quill, and the habit you've developed of writing small notes for him to find when he borrows your ink. You match people with the same precision, but now you talk about love with new language, more personal, more present. You don't just say things like, compatibility is compromise. You say, make sure your silence is shared, not empty. You don't quote ancient monks anymore. You quote a conversation you had over tea when he said, the right person doesn't fix you, they make your mess more livable. People have noticed. One client asked, so, you too? And gestured at him like he was a prize goose. You said, we're not available for matchmaking, and left it at that. Another client brought a heart-shaped cake and said it was for your scrollmate. You pretended not to blush. He pretended not to eat most of it. You've added a new scroll to your cabinet, filed under ongoing successes. It's not color-coded, just tied with twine and a pressed flower you saved from your 3rd sort of date. Inside, it's mostly notes, jokes you've shared, quotes he's said, sketches of the 2 of you drawn in margins during slow days. It's not organized, it's not labeled, it's yours. At night, after the scrolls are rolled and the candles are blown out, you don't walk home alone. He takes your hand without asking, and it feels like the most natural thing in the world, like 2 halves of the same stubborn, biscuit-loving whole. You still argue about tea, you still rearrange the jam. You still forget to say what you mean until hours later when he's just about to fall asleep, and you whisper something like, you made my day easier, and he mumbles back, you make every day possible. It's not perfect, it's not polished, but it's real. And for someone who used to think love was for other people, that's enough. No, more than enough. You open your personal scroll. The one you kept blank for so long, you write one word at the top, happy. And beneath it, without even thinking, you underline it twice.